Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Allied Advisors podcast, the podcast for mid-market manufacturers looking to scale operations and improve that ever-important bottom line. Today's guest is George Pesansky, a Six Sigma Master Black Belt, author, and one of the most experienced continuous improvement practitioners in the business. George's career spans Fortune 500 giants, including National Starch and Chemical and Starwood Hotels, where he served as director of Six Sigma. And over the past 30 years, he's trained and coached more than 10,000 professionals in Lean, Six Sigma, and world-class manufacturing across 6 continents. He created the Deliberate Improvement Framework, which combines Hoshin Kanri, Lean, Six Sigma, and root cause analysis into a system built for sustained results, not just one-time wins. He's a contributing author to Fortune Industry Week and Real Clear Markets, a Forbes Coach Council member, and the author of his brand new book, Super Performance, published by Fast Company Press in 2025. He's also the founder of MyBlendedLearning.com, where he delivers capability training to process industries around the world. George, welcome to the Allied Advisors podcast. Really appreciate you carving out the time to join us.
Oh, no, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
No, thank you. The pleasure's all mine. You know, we had the pre-meeting before this and really a great conversation. You're super impressive. I hope that introduction did you justice, because I really learned so much in a 30-minute pre-meeting. So I can't wait to get into this and share you with my audience, because man, you really have a lot to offer. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. And yeah, the introduction was really wonderful, humbling.
Yeah. And, I mentioned in the introduction that your new book, Super Performance, was published by Fast Company. And you recently had a piece that I shared on LinkedIn, because I read it and I was like, man, this is brilliant. This gets exactly at the heart of this topic. In that piece, you lay out the formula S equals Q times A, which stands for success equals quality times acceptance. You argue companies are drowning in quality on the artificial intelligence side, but cratering on acceptance. For a plant manager or ops leader listening to this, what does acceptance equals 0 actually look like on the shop floor? And what's the one thing leaders get wrong when they try to fix it? You know, AI is a huge topic right now. And I think this really gets at the heart of that adoption curve, why we still feel like we're down here when the technology would suggest that we should get to the top of it as soon as possible.
Oh, yeah. Well, the idea of acceptance, another way to think of it is buy-in. And another kind of way of thinking about it is really change and kind of changing the patterns that we have. And, for those folks that are running a plant, running a business, in that mid-market, and they may not have a lot of resources. They may not have a really deep IT department, or even, a level of capability when it comes to technology. You certainly have patterns. You have those Excel spreadsheets. You have that, seasoned employee who's been taking care of things for you for a decade or two. And the pattern of being able to depend on things that worked yesterday, that really is the greatest barrier to accepting change. The idea that there may be something that could dramatically improve the performance, could dramatically reduce your costs, give you insight that you may not have ever, even realized existed. A lot of those patterns are really blocking the buy-in of the leadership, because what we have today is working. That old saying that, if the clock isn't broken, why don't fix it? Just let it keep running.
Yeah.
And there's a certain wisdom to that in manufacturing, but I think we're right in this moment where we really have to think about embracing change. This is 30 years ago, the green bar printer and the, terminal, the AS400 that, the company was using, and the idea that we have these new Windows PCs and these spreadsheets. I don't know. It seems like what we were using before, we print everything out, we use the highlighter, we find the errors in the order, we make photocopies, we send them out in jackets on the floor. That all's working pretty good for me. I don't know why I would want to change that. That obviously is the recipe for getting behind in your customer service and your quality and your performance. So acceptance to me is embracing change, and embracing change at the leadership level, but also helping your employees, your organization embrace change, and not being afraid of it. It's okay if we learn something that things don't initially work. The important thing is we're progressing forward.
Yeah, I see this in my own practice. We've developed a partnership with a company called Lightforge Works, and I've had Braden McCormick on the show, and we're developing these AI solutions for mid-market manufacturers, especially on the supply chain side. And when you look at it, I mean, you're like, you should do this yesterday, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is going to save you so much money. It's going to save you so much time. It's going to make you so much more efficient, and yet we're struggling to get this buy-in from our clients, because I think exactly what you're saying. They look at it and they're like, I don't know. Maybe they kind of view
Yeah.
it as a science experiment, instead of a tool that's really going to change the way they operate. And
Yes.
you in that article, which I'll link to it in the show notes, and everybody really needs to go out and read it. It was a great article, but in that article, you make a great distinction between the airline kiosk, which people embraced and loved, and retail self-checkout, which
Yeah.
everybody hated. I hated
Right.
it. My parents hated it. Uh,
Yeah.
Same technology, totally different outcome. Well, when you're
Yes.
working inside a mid-market manufacturer, how do you figure out which category a proposed change falls into before you roll it out?
There's so much wisdom, I think, that comes from salespeople, and one of the salespeople I worked with early in my career helped me understand that you always have to think about that with them. What's in it for me? And if you don't have something that is clearly going to benefit your customer, that you can discuss the value and the thing that's going to help them, then you're just wasting their time. You have to have value to be able to sell, and if you can't describe that with them, then you really don't have anything to offer. That, I think, is exactly true of this technology. And I think, the airline kiosk, I was initially extremely skeptical of this. I remember seeing them tearing out the desks in Chicago O'Hare. And I'm thinking, this is going to be a disaster. They're just putting in rows and rows and rows and rows of these kiosks. And like, what are you going to do? Like, how am I going to change my flight? And then the first few times you start to use it, which wasn't perfect, and they made improvements, you realize I can now pick the seat, that I want to sit in. And I can now kind of very quickly kind of just rush through instead of having to wait in line. And these things are the WIFM. It's the value that I get from being able to use that technology. I think the self-checkout lacked the WIFM. I think if the grocery stores, the retail agencies that use that, if they said, well, if you self-checkout, we're going to give you 4% back on your order.
Right.
Well, I'd stand in line and I'd self-checkout myself and be very happy with the value that I returned, because I didn't utilize their labor. If there was some formula to say, this is the benefit to you by doing this, I think there would have been greater adoption and greater support for it. So in this moment with AI, you have to think about not just, okay, what is the generalized benefit, the theory behind it, but what is going to be the individual benefit to the person who's going to be using it or leveraging it, and the business that's going to take advantage of it. And although we can certainly be very scared of the jobs that may be changed, I know in my own role, I've become an order of magnitude more productive by using these tools. And I haven't dismissed or lost any employees. I'm actually thinking about adding some. And it's because of the level of productivity I have to be able to, ideate and turn it into actionable things that I need resources to help me with. So, I think it really is embracing it and thinking of the what's in it for me.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I've seen the same productivity increase. I get way more done in 8 hours than I ever did without AI. I mean, presentations get just infinitely easier.
Yeah.
Emails, generating tracker, everything gets so much easier with AI. You're able to do so much more. I 100% agree with you, but I do think that I don't think everybody's used it yet is one thing, right? I
Yes.
think it's a little bit different than the retail self-checkout in that everybody used the retail self checkout on day one when Walmart
Right.
rolled it out.
Yeah.
With AI, I still talk to people and they're like, "Oh, you use that?" I'm like, "You don't?"
Yeah.
It blows my mind that there's a ton of people out here who don't have a Chat GPT login. Like, how are you doing it? So I do think once we get over that hump, it's going to, that hockey stick curve is going to come into play, but it's just, for whatever reason, it's really slow to get to that acceptance level. So
Yeah, I totally agree. And I just to the point you're making, I think there are people who may have logged in and, tried Chat GPT 3.0 or something, and it was maybe a less than fantastic experience. And you think, well, what am I really going to ask this thing? And what is it really going to tell me? And how good is that response? And that is the tip of the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg. And I think a big part of, certainly the work I know you're doing and the work that I'm doing is really trying to educate people, especially in the space that we're talking about, that if you think you know what's going on, if you think you have a handle on the capabilities this technology is bringing to your business, um, I think you got to sort of accept that you're standing on what I call Mount Stupid. That you've determined, it's this idea that I think I know everything I need to know. The reality is, unless you're looking at AI and you're completely overwhelmed about how much you don't know, and you understand how much you don't know, you haven't yet done your homework. And I think we all crest over that Mount Stupid, thinking we know what it is. But the people who are talking about how much and how hard it is for them to keep up with it, those are the people I know who really understand it.
yeah, it's amazing when I think back just 12 months, when I first started using Chat GPT and generative AI. It was good, it was helpful, I got value out of it, but it couldn't do hard things. It couldn't do presentations. It couldn't generate, you know, files that you could actually use to send to a client, or it wasn't useful in that way. It was a good
Yeah.
thought partner, but that was about it. But now, with Claude and Claude's co-work, you know, window, I mean, it's amazing, right? It's like
Oh,
having a really good intern
yeah.
that can do, presentations. It can do Excel files. It can do documents. I mean, it can do everything, and at a level that's a lot higher than what I could do on my own. Now, I will say it does feel like it's kind of flattening out the creative space, right? The presentations that it generates feel very much like they're all the same. They all look the same. They all have the
Yeah.
same kind of, format to them. But it's still a lot better than what I can create. I can tell you that. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's Shangri-La, but it's better than what I've been producing. So yeah, I agree with you. It's
Yeah.
it's in 12 months, it is just light years from where it started. And the scary part is, where's it going to be in 12, 24, 36, 48 months from now? I mean,
Oh,
it's advancing at such a rapid pace.
yeah.
I used to think, with all the AI hysteria, like, I think maybe that's a little overblown, but now the more I dig into it, the more I'm like, nope, nope, nope. I get it. I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
This
I,
is
I, so personally, I set aside an hour a day, and I don't always fit it in, but I have a commitment to myself, to kind of pay myself first. And I spend that time, on the Gemini site, on Anthropic's site, and the amount of free training, the amount of free content, and just keeping up with the press releases around versioning and capabilities, and then spending time on social media, listening to all the thought leaders who are coming up with use cases, and then all of the third party stuff, all the founders, all the startup stuff that's happening. uh, I Every single hour I spend doing that, I leave with the same feeling that I could have spent all day doing this and still not learned everything I needed to. And by tomorrow, there's going to be more. And, that feeling, again, I would really, kind of try to impress upon all of your listeners that if you're not feeling that way, then you're falling behind.
Mhm.
And I think that's really this point around acceptance is that if we've accepted that this is likely to be larger than the internet in the impact that it ends up having on our society, and who's going to be able to be ahead of it and understand how to leverage it to help them and their employees and their business and their society be better. If you're not ahead of that curve, if you're not steering the ship, then you're just going along for the ride. And we all know the winners and losers in that equation.
100%. 100%. All right. Well, in our pre-meeting, you talked about the leaky cup. Most companies focus on filling the cup without fixing the holes. After 30 years of doing this, what's the most common leak you find in mid-market manufacturers that they generally don't know they have?
Yeah, so I love this analogy. I use it all the time. Put it, certainly in the book with a very, very funny story about it. But this idea that, especially a family business, a small business that maybe has grown into a regional player, the reason it's been successful, the reason that you are where you are, is because you have focused on creating value. You've been filling the cup. And as you've grown, you likely have learned that when problems arise, I got to have great people who can kind of swoop in wearing a cape, and they can successfully patch that leak so that we don't lose any value. And every one of the people who are likely in that category who are listening to the podcast today can probably think of those people or even that person. And you even think of a situation that probably has happened in the last 24 hours or certainly the last 7 days where they saved the order, they saved the customer, they got the equipment running, they fixed the problem, they got the invoice right. And that is fixing the leaks. And the moment you realize that the ability to actually grow and to get beyond this plateau that you've reached has nothing to do with fixing leaks. It has to do with preventing leaks and starting to create systems and really thinking about how to scale, not just those couple of superheroes, but how I scale all of the employees in my organization to be able to anticipate and control and prevent where these leaks are coming from, to really have truly a culture of change and improvement. That moment of realizing that I've got to focus on that, I got to focus on prevention, I got to focus on systems, that's where you're going to break free of that plateau. And a lot of these leaks are going to come from those superheroes. So my favorite thing to do when working, kind of at this level of the organization, and very large companies where I spend most of my time, have what I'm going to consider small to mid-sized businesses. There are individual plants in the middle of the Midwest that are kind of kingdoms onto their own. And they behave like a mid-sized business. They behave like a small business. And they have the superhero. Somebody who's been there 10, 20, 30 years, and they know everything, and they swoop in and fix everything. They get called in at 3 a.m. to get this going. And literally all you have to do is follow these folks around. And they're going to lead you to all of the leaks. And every single time they fix the leak, we have to ask ourselves, what could we have done that would have prevented it in the first place? And what you'll find is today, if you follow that person around and find the leak and just ask yourself that simple question, I'm going to guarantee there was something that you could have done that would have prevented it. And without asking that question, you probably wouldn't have done that. I have a saying that, you have to be able to explain what it is you're going to sustain. So if I'm going to prevent the leak, if I'm going to sustain it, if I can't explain what I'm going to do, then it's going to leak again. And that's why I never get past that plateau. So, find your superhero, follow them at a distance, see where they're patching the leaks, and then ask yourself, what can I do to make that a system to make sure that we prevent it?
I have a little mini teach I do before our value stream mapping, value stream design workshop. So it's the first hour that we're in the room together. And at the end of that mini teach, I tell them, the most important lean tool is a simple question, right? What is the standard? Every time there's a problem, every time you encounter a problem on the shop floor, the first words out of the leader's mouth should be, in my humble but accurate opinion, what is the standard? If you ask that question, you're going to quickly find out you have no standard, you have no system, or you have an inefficient or insufficient standard that didn't work in this case, in which you need to work on improving it. But if you look at everything you do in the, do I have a system, do I have a standard for this thing, and when you find out that you don't, you take steps to put one in place, you will develop that system. That's my
Exactly.
opinion. That's what I tell my clients. In your experience, we all talk about, you mentioned the superhero, tribal knowledge.
Yeah.
That's generally the first thing that I point out to folks is, hey, you are loaded down here with tribal knowledge. And when this tribe walks out the door because of, they retire, they get another job, they get promoted, pick a reason, you're going to have to replace that somehow. And it's good. If you try to do it with tribal knowledge, it's going to take you a long time to get a person in place and get them, to do it. What's your approach there? How do you address that with your clients?
And I think I shared with this, in the pre-meeting a little bit. So I learned at a very early age. I could still remember, being 8, 10, 12 years old, and my father getting a phone call on our corded home phone at 3:00 in the morning. You hear the phone ring in the house and you hear him talking, and then quickly getting dressed and leaving because he's getting called into the factory. He's getting called into the plant. Mm-hmm. So I know this person. I grew up with him. I learned, and that person, that superhero, they just want to do good. They just want to contribute. They do get, certain, kind of benefit out of, being the one that creates the success. But at the end of the day, their intentions are not to be hurting the organization. Their intentions are not selfish. And I think starting with those superheroes and pointing out exactly what you said, what is the standard that you're leaving behind? What is your legacy? And is the legacy that you were the most important, most necessary, and when you were unable, like in my father's case, due to his health, to support, that damages your legacy. Now people look at it and say, well, if it wasn't for this guy who we depended on too much, we wouldn't be in this place right now. Mm-hmm. You want to be in the place that you created a community, you created a system. So I have really tried to help find those places where the deviations exist, where the standard is inadequate, and really tried to help the culture appreciate the value of that legacy, that standard, and contributing to creating something that we can explain, which means then we're going to be successful in being able to sustain it. Because if you can teach those superheroes to leave a system behind versus a quick fix, the rate of change that you may be able to enjoy is enormous. Those are the people who come to our deliberate improvement training. I love getting those superheroes and helping kind of let them see that their legacy is teaching teams, teaching others, and creating systems they can walk away from.
Yeah, I tell people the dirty secret in manufacturing is that firefighting actually feels kind of good, right? Yeah. I mean, if you're the one constantly putting out the fire, there's some self-fulfillment you get there, yeah. Right? I mean, so, getting people to see that that's actually a bad way to do it, that it's better if we can document a standard and train others to perform in accordance with that standard. There's you talk about success equals quality times acceptance. There's an acceptance hurdle that you got to get over there, because a lot of folks, they don't like it, right? They like being the go-to person. If you're taking that away from them, maybe they're not so fond of it. I think another challenge with it is, especially in the small to mid-market space, there's no industrial engineering resources on staff, right? Yeah. All you have is a team full of shop floor operators, supervisors, managers, the doers, and they don't have the industrial engineering background, and it's not what they enjoy doing. They do these jobs because they like it, right? This is how they've chosen to make a career. So when you start telling them, hey, I need you to take 2 hours every day and start documenting what you do, like, with a laptop and Microsoft Word, that's just not their it's just not who they are. It's just not their skill set. They don't want to do it. So there's some pushback to it. Have you experienced that in your practice? And what do you tell folks?
Yeah, absolutely. And, some of the clients that I work with, are lucky enough where they do have those kinds of engineers and resources. But even in those facilities where they do, those tend to be so large, there's never enough of them to go around, that you still have those same kind of challenges. So, I think it kind of comes back to the culture, and it's a lot of what we do, again, like with what we call our deliberate improvement program, where we're taking, those high potential employees, we're taking those superheroes, the people with tons of experience and have a legacy that they can create and offer. They have the credibility to really lead and develop. And, I think, we had talked about this again in the pre-meeting, these simple lean tools, teaching somebody what a spaghetti diagram is, and having them appreciate that if we have that layout of the work center, and all I'm going to do is kind of trace the pattern of the work that I do. And I just want to kind of determine how far I'm walking or how many times I go back and forth to the tool chest. And sometimes, just looking at that on the security camera, going back and playing it back and just drawing those lines. I cannot tell you how many times, we've done setup reductions and things like that. And we ask the people doing the work, before we really dig into the observations and the data, how many trips do you think you made to the tool, cabinet? And they say, I don't know, 3 or 4, the answer is 30. Like you just start to, again, start to get used to it. It's that old saying about, boiling the frog. The temperature just slowly changes and you don't realize the water's boiling. But if I asked you to go out and do this changeover right now and you had to walk back and forth 30 times, you'd be like, this is killing me. But over time, you just got used to it and it just became familiar. So getting people to sometimes use simple tools, and it isn't maybe the bridge of actually getting a really talented industrial engineer, but learning to see the waste, learning to quantify the waste. Again, I think every lean practitioner appreciates the standards, and then being able to see the waste and being able to quantify the waste. I'd put, those in my top 3, right?
Yeah. Well, changing gears a little bit, your whole company, My Blended Learning, is built around the idea that compliance-based training doesn't work, that you have to make people want to engage. In a manufacturing environment where most training is safety compliance and SOPs, how do you flip that switch with someone who's been doing it the same way for 20 years?
Yeah, I started off working in a larger size chemicals company and doing training and the learning management system. I think the thing that everybody who works in an organization that has that compliance training, our slips, trips, and falls, and our ethics training, and you got to go through this module, and it's a question of how fast can I click through this? How many can it accept wrong answers until I click on the right one, until I just push my way through it? That's not training. The learning and development people who create those things have great intentions, but the execution tends to not be so good. So we like to think of what we're doing as an LMS, but we call it the learning marketing system.
Right.
That it really is marketing. You're selling to an audience that may not fully appreciate the value that you're offering. And if that's something like the slips, trips, and falls training, or much more value added things like how to make a spaghetti diagram or how to see waste, it can be any of those things. The initial reaction from somebody who's been doing a job for 10 years is, I see waste, it's laying on the floor right there, and then we sweep it up and we throw it away, and yeah, it's wasteful. Well, yes, but you don't realize what it is you don't know. So being able to market by leading with the outcome, leading with the benefit, that's kind of what we try to focus on. We focus on 3 questions: the what, the how, and the why. Most training is all about the how, but what we start with is the why, and then move into, okay, what this is and the benefit that you're going to get from it. Again, the what's in it for me. And then the last thing we do, which is honestly the easiest, is the how. So most organizations spend 80% of the time on the how and 20% on the what, and very, very little on the why. We kind of flip that script, and we spend a huge amount of time on the why and the what, helping people understand, when is this the right thing to do? Why would you need it? What exactly is the problem that you could solve, or the answer that it can provide you? And then the how can be much easier, because now it's a question of following a recipe, kind of using a technique. And the more we can make that hands-on, the more we can make that experiential. We do a lot of exercises, activities, to help people do that, a lot of coaching. So not a fan of the classroom experience.
I think having a tiered daily leadership routine where each level of the organization, has a meeting where they're reviewing the status and the process confirmation results, all that good stuff. Having that, just the communication aspect, having a structured time where you're meeting with your team and talking about, what you're working on, explaining why it's important. I think that goes a long way to building the buy-in that you're talking about there, right? Getting people on board with why these things matter. Because I think too often leaders kind of, hey, just go build it, right? Go do the thing. But they don't really take the time to go leave the office, go out on the shop floor and engage with the people and explain to them why they're asking them to do this thing and why it's important for the business. I think, if organizations that do that really well, they tend to be the ones that are also super successful.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And having done a lot of work in like world-class manufacturing that really brings some of that structure, that organization, to companies to do those things. What I have seen a lot in unsuccessful implementations is the idea that we've implemented those meetings, and now people are like, oh my gosh, we're such meeting fatigue. We got meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings and spreadsheets, and what are we doing? And that just, to me, is showing that we didn't spend any time on why, and we also didn't really spend a lot of time on what the outcome is of these meetings. And truthfully, if you didn't follow the spreadsheet or the checklist, if you didn't maybe use all of the best practices and the techniques, but you knew why you were doing a Gemba walk and you knew what you were trying to learn, I think even if you kind of do some things that are not ideal in how you got it done, if the purpose was to listen, learn, and understand the waste and the issues your employees are facing, so that we can kind of come back and talk about things we can do as leaders to help support our people in the organization, that was an amazing Gemba walk, regardless of how you actually did it. But so often people are like, hey, it's 10 o'clock. We're going to do our Gemba walk. Let's put on our safety vests. Let's go talk around. We're going to go talk to everybody, and we're going to ask them about the kids in the soccer game. And we're going to look at the machine, and we're going to draw some notes and come back to the office and say, okay, we'll see you tomorrow at 10. No good.
But I think there's a reason. To me, a lot of small companies look at a lot of big companies and they say, well, the reason they're successful is because they've got so much more money than we've got.
No.
And exactly. That's not true. That's not true at all. The reason they're successful is because they recognize the structure that's important for them to scale a business, right? Because they force this, like the meetings to have meetings. Big companies force that. And I agree with you. I've been in those meetings. I've worked at these companies, and some of them you're like, when is this going to be over? This is such a waste of time. Yeah. But looking back at it, and now having been able to see, both sides of that coin, I think just the fact that you get people in a room talking about a problem or a group of problems, there's still value in that, even if it's, let's say, not as good as it could be. The fact that they're all together talking about it, looking each other in the eye, the organization still gets something out of it. And I think the results bear that out, right? There's a reason that these companies grow to the level that they are, because, they force these things.
I could definitely see how organizations like look at the bigger company and say, okay, there's so much resource, so many assets, so many things, the economy of scale that they have. But, and I know this, you've been in some of those organizations. The reality is they can't get out of their own way. They they are battleships, and the amount of time it takes for them to turn, to act, to respond is so slow and so cumbersome and so challenging that if you think of yourself as a speedboat, as a small to mid-size organization, that as a leadership team, you can collectively pivot, you can make decisions. Most importantly, you could admit you made a mistake. That's what a big organization cannot do. They cannot admit that the initiative, the effort, the project failed, because somebody's entire 20 or 30 year career is going to be ruined by the admission that this was a failure. But as a small to mid-sized company, you can say, hey, we tried this. It didn't work the way we wanted. We're going to quickly learn from that mistake, pivot, see the waste in what we've done, see the variation in what we were doing, and do something different and accept that that was maybe not what we wanted. If you can embrace that idea of really understanding waste, understanding variation, and accepting that failure is not the enemy, a fail to learn from the failure is the enemy, you can run circles around these battleships. And I think anybody who's been in a big one knows that everything I'm saying is 100% true.
100%. I had Mr. Winfred Rockensteiner on the show. Mr. Rockensteiner is the head of logistics and supply chain for the Power Solutions division for Robert Bosch. So, I mean, huge division with plants all over the world, right? Thousands of people report under this man. And I was talking to him about it, and he said, the thing that people don't realize is companies like Bosch, they wish they were like these small companies. They wish they could react like they do. But they can't, because they've got all this overhead and all this all the structure that's got to be, massaged and finagled. So I think I think smaller to mid-sized companies would do well to realize where their strengths are and really try to lean into them and play to them.
Well, my analogy, actually, I kind of took it from a CEO at a big company that I worked for. And that's exactly what he described, that we're a battleship and we're not able to turn fast enough to respond to emerging market trends, customer needs. And he wanted to divide all of those divisions, all of those, markets into speedboats and encourage them to make mistakes. And it was brilliant. I think it was one of the most successful companies I worked at.
And they get in their own little echo chambers too within the company, right? If the guy, which I guess that happens in all sizes, but I saw it when I was at Bosch. This was 2017, 2018. At that point, the thought in the automotive world was that electric vehicles were going to take over the world in the next 5 years, right? The ICE was dead. Tesla was the way to go. And I remember asking the question, like, that doesn't seem realistic. We don't have the power grid to support that. These cars cost a lot of money. Not everybody can afford them. I don't see that. And that was like, pardon my crassness, but I'd have been better off farting in the middle of the conference room instead of asking that question, right? I mean, it was like, what? Did you just shoot the sacred cow? And the fact of the matter is, they went all in on this thing, and it hasn't worked out for them, right? I mean, a lot of these electric mobility product lines, they're shuttering them because it just doesn't take off, because they can't have an honest conversation, because, to your point, somebody has staked a career on being right. And if you oppose that, it doesn't work out too well for you. So,
and I think, that definitely the echo chamber is louder the bigger the organization, and the higher you get, you end up, people surround themselves with sycophants, people who are going to agree with them, people who are going to support them. I think, again, the benefit of the market that you really focus on, and the folks that are listening to the podcast, is they may have some of that around them, but they can actually change that, because there's not that many layers. And hiring people, encouraging people to disagree, that is just remarkable. It's actually, go back to the AI we started with. So one of the things that I've learned, it was something I picked up from, a thought leader on social media. So I use Claude. That's my favorite, kind of, platform LLM. And I have a skill and a lot of skills, but one of the skills I created that kind of gives my large language model its personality is to be my critic. So everything that I write, everything I create, its sole purpose is to find everything it can wrong with it. Because you'll find that AI will be a sycophant. It'll tell you that everything you've done is brilliant, and that can be its own trap. But that's not that different than the real world when you start working in a lot of businesses.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, George, again, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show. Like I was telling everybody, I'd encourage everybody to go out and buy the book, Super Performance by George Pesansky. A wealth of knowledge. You're such an impressive resource. Thank you so much for carving out the time. I'll link to your LinkedIn profile, Amazon for the book. I'll also throw the link for the article in the show notes. Everybody, if you're listening, take the time, click on the links, check them out. You won't regret it. So again, thanks so much for the time.
Oh, thank you, Justin. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll be talking again soon.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
Take care.